Well, let's get some business news for you now. Kate Moody is with us in the studio. Hi there, Kate. And starting again with Venezuela, the country is close to defaulting on a huge debt, isn't it?
That's right. And international creditors have been summoned to a meeting in Caracas where the government hopes to renegotiate about $60 billion worth of its total debt mountain, which is worth $150 billion. A separate committee meeting in New York has again postponed a decision on whether the state oil giant has already defaulted on its debt after it missed a payment last week. The negotiations will be complicated by U.S. sanctions on the country and many of its officials. The EU has also announced new measures this Monday. Now, for more, we can cross to Caracas and the Wall Street Journal's Anatoly Kurmanaev. Thanks so much for joining us here. What are you hearing as this creditors meeting gets underway? Is there any chance that a restructuring deal might in fact be reached?
Very unlikely. In fact, the meeting finished pretty much as soon as it started. According to some participants, it lasted just half an hour. President Maduro's Vice President Tarek El-Hassami, this is a man who's on a U.S. blacklist for allegedly trafficking drugs. He gave a short speech, and that was the end of it. There was no concrete proposals to reach a deal with investors, no negotiations, no back and forth dialogue whatsoever. So the investors are being puzzled, exactly why they've been invited to, make quite a difficult journey for this. Some of them say that they're worried they're just being used as a prop, that President Maduro is going to come out and say, look, we tried, we did our best, but it just doesn't work out, we're going to default. So yeah, very little hope for a productive deal here.
So where does that leave the situation? What's the government's next step?
Well, the situation is very volatile. By the end of Monday, Venezuela could be officially in default. They have almost $300 million of late payments that they have to pay today. The deadline for these late payments is today. If we don't make these payments, they're officially in default, which would trigger basically requests for up to $60 billion worth of debt. So quite a crucial day. Venezuelan government today in the meeting said they're going to continue to keep paying, but no money has shown up so far, and we only have about 2 to 3 hour business hours here in the Americas left. So a lot of uncertainty, and we're going to know in the next 24 hours or so if Venezuela is still a credit-worthy country.
Now, Maduro insists that default is not an option, but even by its own estimate, the government is really running out of money very quickly.
Absolutely. In fact, they are living hand to mouth. They are postponing some payments in order to make others more crucial ones. They're differentiating between money owned by the central government as opposed to money owned by the state oil company, which earns pretty much all of Venezuela's money. They are trying to just plug in holes day by day. There's no concrete plan. And today has shown, just confirmed that. A very short meeting without any concrete proposals. The government just trying to buy itself enough time, as I said, day by day, in order to stage next elections. Some people say as early as February to win them, and then probably go to default, see what happens next. But it's default now is a matter of weeks or months. It's no longer a matter of years as before.
Now, Venezuelans have been bearing the brunt of this economic crisis, the public facing shortages of food, medicine, basic supplies. What would a default really mean? Could it make things worse?
Absolutely, it will make things catastrophic. It's actually quite ironic. The debt restructuring in Venezuela is the biggest economic news in the world at the moment. But here in Venezuela, you hear very little talk about it. It's just not what on top of people's concern. This is a country in the midst of major economic crisis. People are struggling to eat, struggling to get by. They don't care about bonds, about restructuring. It's too complex, too out there. They're just trying to make ends meet. If Venezuela does default, that means in the short term at least, freeze of imports, which means it's going to be even more difficult for Venezuela to sell its oil and to earn money to import food and medicines, which are already very scarce. That's going to hit the poorest, the hottest, and we could expect a full-blown humanitarian crisis if Venezuela goes into an official default.
All right, Anatoly Kurmanaev, thank you so much for that insight from Caracas. Let's check in on the day's trading action now. We saw red across the board in Europe. Paris CAC 40 losing nearly 0.75% at the close. The financial industry trended downwards. The pound sterling, meanwhile, slid 0.6% against the US dollar as Prime Minister Theresa May faces growing skepticism over the progress of Brexit negotiations. Wall Street's been struggling for gains with some renewed concern about efforts to reform the U.S. tax code. Slight gains across the board there. The Nasdaq up nearly 0.2% this hour. Moving on to some of the day's other business headlines now. General Electric will slash its dividend in half, reducing it for only the second time since 1938. It's part of a massive restructuring plan as new chief executive John Flannery tries to turn around the struggling conglomerate. GE also reduced its outlook for the rest of the year and said it would push ahead with its plans to sell off $20 billion worth of businesses, including its locomotives and lighting divisions. Reports suggest job cuts could also be on the cards. Shares have dropped 8%. Uber is inching closer to $10 billion worth in fresh financing from the Japanese group SoftBank and Silicon Valley's Dragoneer. The ride-hailing app's board approved the deal this Wednesday and said it would use the money to expand and develop new technology. If the deal goes through, it could bring some stability to Uber, which has faced a string of scandals, regulatory battles, and the ousting of its founder and chief executive earlier this year. And Qualcomm has rejected an unsolicited takeover bid from Broadcom, saying that more than $100 billion offer dramatically underestimated the value of its chip-making business. Broadcom could try to sweeten the deal or launch a proxy battle if it decides to pursue what would be the biggest tech deal in history. Finally, how much would you pay for a mushroom? Well, it's a truffle to be exact. And at an annual auction in Italy, an 850-gram truffle was sold for a whopping 75,000 euros. That's way higher than the average price. But Italian truffles have indeed become more and more expensive over the past few years. Aaron Ogonke explains why.
Climate change brings bad news for fans of white truffles. The fine dining ingredient is already one of the most expensive in the world. Now, dry weather, drought, and severe storms have caused prices to skyrocket.
Very little rain means that for this reason there are very few products. This week the truffles started growing a little bigger and a bit rounder because with this week's rain the earth has softened a bit. So we've managed to find some truffles that are a bit more rounded, but up until now, with the very hard earth, it's really hard to extract them.
This year, average prices of white truffles is at a record high, up twice as much as last year. Truffle production has decreased by 30% over the past 25 years, leaving a limited supply of the highly coveted tubers. 2/3 of Italy's farmland has been hit by this year's lengthy drought, costing Italian farmers more than 2 billion euros.
That's all the business news for now, Laura.
That's one expensive mushroom, isn't it? Kate, thanks very much indeed. Kate Moody there with the business. We're taking a short break. Don't go away. Much more still to come.